Hello and welcome to episode 370 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. How are you, Ian?
I'm doing well, Jason. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Too bad we're 10 episodes too far into the series, because at the end, it would have been good to tie this in as episode 360, but we got to wait all the way to the end of the podcast to get to that one.
We'll get there. We'll get there eventually. We have a very good show this week, as longtime friend of the show, Steve Giordano, is joining us from Nomadic Aviation Group. He'll be here.
How did we get a hold of him?
Very, very carefully. He's going to join us to talk about what happens when an airline goes out of business and you need to move all of their aircraft into storage.
It's in your own backyard.
Yeah, at least one of them. Steve and his crew at Nomadic have moved nearly 24 aircraft over the past week and a half, and there are more to come. So he's going to explain how that all works and some of the work that they've had to do and some of the challenges that they've had to deal with as they do that work a little later in the show. But first, we turn our attention to Denver, where over the weekend, a Frontier Airlines A321neo struck a person on the runway. We've since learned that that person scaled a perimeter fence at the airport and intentionally walked onto the runway. The Denver medical examiner has ruled that person's death a suicide. Thankfully, no one on the aircraft was seriously injured, though it did cause an engine fire. The pilots rejected the takeoff, were able to stop the aircraft on the runway. Because of that engine fire and damage to the aircraft, smoke filled the cabin, so they elected to evacuate the aircraft on the runway. During the evacuation, 12 people were injured, 5 were sent to the hospital. Nearly all of them, as best we know, have been released. This raises all sorts of questions about how that person got there and what's going on in Denver. The airport chief led a press conference earlier this week saying that ground detectors were set off by the fence that person scaled, but a nearby herd of deer were initially thought to be responsible. And because of the terrain in that area near the fence, the person was not necessarily visible entirely. And then, because the deer were there, the automated cameras kept jumping between that person and the deer. So then the person was sighted, but that area of the airport, runway 17 left, is so remote that it would have been impossible to get people out there quickly enough to deal with this before that person made their way on to the runway.
Yeah. If you're not familiar with Denver Airport, it is the size of a city, basically. It is 33,531 acres, according to Wikipedia, which is 52.4 square kilometers or 135.7 square kilometers, which is just absolutely massive.
It is the largest airport by area in the United States.
In North America.
In North America, and the second largest airport by area in the world, second only to Dammam in Saudi Arabia.
So there are entire ecosystems and nature, I guess you could say ecosystems too, inside that airport. It is a massive area to not just keep control of everything inside, but keep unwanted things out. And as high-tech as your intrusion detection systems are going to be, it's never going to stop everything, and it's never going to detect everything over that amount of space. So there's so many questions about how did this person get there? How did they end up on a runway? Well, they just probably hopped over a fence and walked there.
Indeed, they did. That's exactly what happened. And because of the distances involved, it wasn't possible for the airport to get folks out there. The remaining question, though, is how that person got to where they climbed over the fence in the first place. No vehicle has been found, no additional clues that would yield how they made it to that. So they may have been walking for a very long time.
Yeah. Denver's airport is way outside of the city too. So it is, I don't want to call it in a remote area, but it's not exactly in downtown, of course, because of the size.
The surrounding area is very rural. It's the opposite of in the city.
Yeah. It's not something you really think of much, that someone is going to intentionally hop the fence and go walk around on the runway. Things happen. It's happened here in New York where it's not so much a fence, but a lot of the perimeter of JFK is water, Jamaica Bay. And years ago, there was a case of, I think it was two people on jet skis that broke down. The nearest land happened to be the airport, and they were just kind of wandering around out on a taxiway next to a runway because that's just where they ended up. So these things do happen. It's not impossible, not unheard of before, but what is, I think, close to unheard of is that for that person to not only wander onto a runway, but then get struck by an aircraft, which in this case seems more intentional than not, which is real unfortunate, but it's not that unheard of for someone to just accidentally end up on an airport.
Yeah. Certainly not accidental in this case, and the investigation is ongoing. The other thing that was flagged to us by multiple people, both folks writing in via email and on social media, was the story of a mother who was scolded by a Frontier phone rep for not taking her personal belongings with her during the evacuation.
Say that again. Surely you have that backwards.
I have not misspoken. That is, in fact, what the Frontier phone rep reportedly scolded her for. Now, this was a case of a mother who has a lap child, was flying with a lap infant who requires formula. And the woman had packed formula in her carry-on bag, but in the evacuation left said carry-on bag in the cabin, like you are supposed to do.
Yes, that is good. Following instructions is good.
And because the aircraft became an accident scene for the investigation, for the NTSB, the FAA is investigating, local police, obviously, all of these agents, they've, restricted, they haven't been able to get things back from the aircraft yet. And the woman called Frontier and said, "Hi, I was on the plane that hit a person in Denver. Here's the situation. I still need to get home. And what do we do about, the lack of all these things?" Thankfully, they're staying with family and they can borrow a lot of stuff and they can go buy, more formula and things like that. But also, you need your stuff back. And the Frontier phone rep's response, as reported by this woman, was to scold her for not taking those things with her in the first place during the evacuation, which you are not supposed to do.
Clearly some retraining needed of that representative. I'm honestly surprised they were able to get a hold of anyone for customer service at Frontier, not an airline known for its stellar customer service. So maybe this person just didn't know what was going on, didn't know the situation, certainly was not well informed. But yeah, not great. Also, I was reading that either this passenger or others were just not particularly well taken care of after the incident. They weren't able to get diapers or basically, I think this is coming off a Reddit post that I was reading, that they weren't able to get things they needed for their baby after they evacuated the aircraft, and they were not being taken care of by Frontier. But one thing I did find interesting in the responses to this post on Blue Sky, Jonathan Koo, or Jonk, who we've actually had on the podcast a long time ago, is a volunteer at PDX in Portland, and actually let us know, hey, we're prepared for these kind of things. At least at PDX, we have several emergency supply closets for one-off needs. So think exactly cases like this, where there's an aircraft emergency, people evacuate without the things they need. So the volunteers there have access to water, snacks, diapers, clothing, anything you might need, apparently even dog food, which is, that's really thinking ahead.
Sure.
Dental,
Why
snacks,
not?
jackets, things you might need if you have evacuated 250 people off an aircraft who are not supposed to have basically anything on them. And if there are pharmacy items, medics can potentially provide that. But in this case, it doesn't seem like passengers were well taken care of, either by the airport or Frontier itself. Not shocking with Frontier. A little disappointed if this is the case with Denver, but learning experience and room for improvement all around, it seems.
Yeah. So we'll see what the investigation tells us more about how this happened and some of the learnings that come of it, based not only on the person making it onto the airfield, but also what happens afterwards and how those folks are taken care of. FedEx has returned the MD-11 to service. Without much fanfare, it began revenue service with a pair of MD-11s over the weekend. November 521 Fox Echo and November 621 Fox Echo are back in service, and those aircraft have been inspected, pylon repairs have taken place, and they're ready to go. The FAA didn't say anything about this until reporters specifically said, "Hey, FAA, did you approve FedEx flying these again?" And they said, "Yeah, we did."
Oh, okay. Thanks for the stellar communication.
Yeah.
Not sure that November 521 Foxtrot Echo is the correct reg. 621 Foxtrot Echo is, unless FedEx is apparently operating a Patriot Airways 727-100, which in that
512.
Okay. Well, I mean, if they do want to
My
operate
mistake.
727 again, that's an even better story in my mind.
I mean,
can we do that instead?
I don't think we may. I mean, we can do anything we put our minds to, Jason.
That's true. Okay, that's an alternate timeline thing. But yeah, this was really weird where it was a very high profile crash, and then you have the type just returning to service without mum's the word, apparently. It just kind of happened. Still surprised it's happening right now, given the skyrocketing cost of fuel and it not exactly being peak demand season, but FedEx is going to do what it needs to do, and apparently this is what it needs to do.
Yeah. So this is the first pair of aircraft to return to service after the mandated grounding, required inspections, and if necessary, repairs to the aircraft or replacements of the pylons following the November 4th, 2025 crash of a UPS MD-11 in Louisville. Flight 2976 was departing for Hawaii and crashed shortly after takeoff when the number one, so the left wing engine, separated from the aircraft. The NTSB is continuing its investigation, and to that end has scheduled 2 days of investigative hearings, May 19th and 20th at NTSB headquarters. You can attend those in person if you're in Washington, D.C., or there will be a live stream. The docket will be available prior to or at the beginning of the start of the hearing. So the docket includes all of the factual reports. So that includes flight data recorder, cockpit voice recorder, ground photos, other investigative materials. That will be opened at the start of the hearing. And that docket number is Delta Charlie Alpha 26 Mike Alpha 024. And we'll put a link in the show notes to that and the live stream as well, if you're interested in watching that. And we'll have coverage of that in our next episode. So that is coming up next week. But coming up just after the break, we have Steve Giordano from Nomadic Aviation Group to walk us through what happens when you need to move a whole mess of planes and don't really have a plan for that. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been talking over the past few weeks about the demise of Spirit Airlines, and no one or no company has been more instrumental in what became a massive operation to get former Spirit aircraft into storage and where they need to be than Steve Giordano and his team at Nomadic. And Steve has been kind enough to take a few moments out of his insanely busy schedule this week to come chat with us about what a project that has been. Welcome back to the show, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ian. I always have time for Flight Radar 24. Ian and Jason, you guys are the best. And regardless of what I'm doing, I'll always drop all for you guys.
Thanks, Steve. Great to have you back.
I'm glad we have that on recording.
Yes. You use it against me later.
Yeah. It's been a minute. You've been, I'm sure, to every continent on Earth since then, maybe Antarctica. Who knows? Do you repossess aircraft from, or move aircraft to Antarctica? I guess, is that the one place you haven't been?
We haven't yet, but if we do, that's definitely one we should talk about. I'm down. I mean, I'm willing.
So you've been busy.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. You started gearing up. The writing was on the wall for Spirit, and they ceased all operations overnight, 3 UTC. So overnight here in the US, all of the planes get parked. And then do you get a phone call? Is there a Steve signal that shines into the air near Philadelphia? Like, how does that work when they call you up and say, hey, we need you to move as many Spirit aircraft to the desert as you possibly can in as short a time as possible?
Yeah, it's like an air raid siren in my neighborhood starts going off. Like, I slide down a pole into my office and yeah, no, it's wild. This thing did happen fast, but it also didn't happen fast in some ways because, like you said, the writing's been on the wall for some time now. And the way it works is that our clients are the aircraft leasing companies, not Spirit Airlines, not any banks or creditors. It's the leasing companies that own the aircraft, that have the aircraft leased to the various airlines for 5, 10, 15-year terms. So these leasing companies have obviously been watching the situation very carefully. And Spirit, I wouldn't say that it's unique in this respect, but it has aircraft leased from a variety of different leasing companies. So like all of the big ones, essentially. I think there's like somewhere around 12 to 15 different lessors that had metal on the property at Spirit, and that includes
way more than I would have thought for an airline the size of Spirit, who is now a much smaller airline than it was in years past. Over a dozen leasing companies. That's no wonder you've been so busy. Just the logistical nightmare of managing not just where are these planes and how do we move them, but also, we have to report to 12 to 15 different companies on these aircraft. That's insane.
Well, I wish that every one of them was our client, and our goal is to make every one of them our client. But in Spirit, we represented 5 different lessors of the group. And let me also kind of clarify.
That's 5 times the work.
Yeah, it is. It is. And not every leasing company owned every airplane in its entirety. Some owned engines, some owned aircraft and engines. And to make matters even more complicated, some of the aircraft were like owned by one lessor, where the left engine was owned by another and the right engine was owned by a bank. So you're looking at these assets, divide the value by 3, and then each third is owned by a different company with some sort of legal claim on the asset as a whole. So very, very complicated situation. And I don't know that it was always so many lessors on the property. I know the LCCs, the ULCCs generally tend to diversify a little bit more. Maybe they're more of a credit risk, and the biggest of the big won't necessarily say, I'll give you 30 airplanes. They want to spread it around. I don't know if that's dictated by the lessors or by the airline itself or what their strategy is, but the low-cost carriers tend to have more lessors in my experience that own metal there. So the first call that we got came in around, I think, January or February. As you know, Spirit's been in the news a lot over the last 6 months, and they've had problems. Obviously, the thing that put everything over the edge was the cost of fuel, but their business model has led to their business suffering for quite a while for a variety of reasons that I'm sure you've gone into ad nauseum, and I have as well. So the first call we started getting was from one of our clients that had 10 aircraft on the property remaining. I think at one time they had more like 20 or 30, but it has been kind of a slow burn because I don't know the numbers. You guys would know better than me. I know at one time Spirit had, I think, close to 200 aircraft. And then with the GTF problems, they parked quite a few. And then over the course of time, they were parking more and more, cutting capacity, cutting costs, terminating leases early, getting out of the debt cycle that was bankrupting them. So they were cutting costs for a while, slimming down the fleet. And I don't know, I think right at the day the doors closed, did they have somewhere around 80 on the property?
Give or take. I mean, at the same time, to complicate matters, they were also already exiting aircraft, specifically the Neo fleet. They were already shipping aircraft out for long-term storage and exiting the fleet as the rest of the entire operation was crumbling. So that's something we'll talk about too. But they were actively contracting, and about probably less than half the size they were this time last year.
Yeah, so they've shrunken down a lot. And so this client had their eyes on 10 321 Neos. And these are like very new airplanes. Obviously, the highest asset value of any of Spirit's fleet are going to be the brand new or newer A321 Neo aircraft, especially ones with good engines because of all the GTF problems in the aircraft that have been parked for a while. So the thing that's been challenging is they renegotiated a lot of the leases. And by the way, another reason I think that a lot of these lessors were added in the last few months because something that Spirit's done, which is what a lot of airlines do, is sale leaseback programs.
Yep.
Yeah. So they own assets, or they owned older assets, and then they just put out like an RFP and try to sell those assets, but still keep them through lease contracts after the fact. So that's a way to just inject some cash into a company and turn a liability into a fixed cost and a lease on the books. So a lot of that happened. I don't know how many they owned in the very end. The thing that we identified early on with this first customer is that the landscape, the actual logistics to pick up the airplanes, it changes every day, right? These airplanes, especially the newer ones, fly all the, like 20 hours a day, maybe 22 hours a day. Like the goal with any airline is utilization. You have an airplane, you're paying a fixed cost depending on the terms of your lease agreement for that airplane every month. You got to put butts in the seats and engines turning and the airplane in the air for every possible hour that you own the lease on that aircraft. So every single day, these airplanes were parked in different cities, and Spirit's route network wasn't just domestic US. They had Lima, Peru, and they have Colombia and Costa Rica and the Caribbean. And so every single day for the last 6 months, whenever there's been writing on the wall that things could quickly crumble, the lessor had some sort of inside contact where they were able to get the locations of the airplanes for that night, and then maybe the next night, and then maybe the next night. So they had like a 2 or 3 day look forward and said, if everything goes bust, this is where we're going to need to get the airplanes from. So it wasn't really possible for us to accurately plan or quote them in advance, just like the idea that we were going to have to scramble, but the locations would be known, and then we would have like a day or two to figure it out. So that had been happening. I think it happened 2 times over like 4 or 5 months. And then the can got kicked down the road, and then we were told to stand down. And then, I just changed the status in our system to waiting. And then the airplanes kind of go back to the back burner. But on Friday, May 1st, the first call came in from them at 10 o'clock in the morning. And they said, this time it looks pretty real. We're getting word that they may shut down actually tonight. So we need you guys to start coming up with a plan. Here's the city list, and give me a call back in an hour once you have stuff squared away.
Oh, okay. No rush.
Yeah, no rush. And I was driving to Pittsburgh because my son was graduating from college that weekend, and Bob was home. So he really bore the brunt of the first 24 hours where I was more out of the loop and just available on a emotional support basis.
So in this situation, where do you even begin? Because like you said, Spirit was still a fairly sizable airline. And it's not like they decided, okay, at 10 p.m. tonight, we're going to bring all of our aircraft back to our hubs in Atlantic City or Detroit. No, those airplanes stopped wherever they happened to be wherever that last flight got canceled. How do you triage the situation? How do you determine, okay, we're going to send someone to Detroit and Newark and Philly, and we're going to bring those planes first? Because certainly you only have so many people to operate so many flights. Yep. What do you do first?
So really the first thing was to make sure that we had the ability to move airplanes very, very quickly, because what we knew was going to start becoming the most pressing issue was when an airline ceases operations, their airline operating certificate doesn't just cease like instantly, right? It remains in place. Spirit has what's called a 119 team. It's their management team, their management pilots, post holders per se in the eyes of the FAA. So that would be the director of flight operations, the director of safety, chief pilot, assistant chief pilot. Like they're the core management pilots that report directly to the POI at the FAA. So the AOC doesn't dissolve overnight. There's like a fuse that's lit when they cease operations. And, it may be 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, a week, a month. We don't know how long it's going to be until that AOC is fully recalled. And so that means that while the aircraft are still deemed airworthy per the Spirit Airlines maintenance program, and while the lessor has terminated the leases and retained legal custody of the aircraft back, there exists a short window where the aircraft can be operated without a special ferry permit because they're airworthy. They were flying passengers just mere hours before. So That's the normal way that we operate and we grab airplanes in these type of circumstances. And that was the plan all along. So no DAR needed, no on-site maintenance. We got a Spirit maintenance program. We got a jet. All we needed to do was have pilots on site and ready to go.
So while business stopped, Spirit Airlines was still Spirit Airlines. It still had the capability to move its own aircraft around under its own entity. While it may not be flying passengers, it's still, what you're saying is basically, there's still Spirit. It's still alive.
In theory, the AOC is still alive, but there were also very serious things that were not alive, like for one being their dispatch center shut down immediately. So they had no way to dispatch aircraft. All the crews immediately lost access to their Jeppesen nav pubs. And then there wasn't gate personnel, station personnel. I mean, nobody was getting paid. Pilots didn't know whether they were going to be getting another paycheck. I mean, it was sheer chaos. So there was all that in the mix as well. And then there was a lot of, it just happened so quickly that caught everybody with their pants down, right? So nobody really knew what to do. We thought we knew what to do. And Bob and I had agreed early on that if Spirit ceased operations, rather than try to tackle this with our own core team, it was going to be bigger than we would be even able to go. Not to mention the fact that Bob and I in these situations are more valuable quarterbacking things from an ops perspective. We need to have a high level view. We need to be able to see everything that's going on and kind of move the sliders around to keep the operation working. So we decided early that we were going to use Spirit crews. And there's a few reasons for this. Number one, they're available. They live near these cities in a lot of cases. They are current and qualified. But here's a big one, and of course they need the money, of course, right? So that's it's also doing the right thing. But a big one is flying ferry flights without the support of an airline is something that is very different that a normal line pilot doesn't necessarily contend with on a daily basis. And ferry pilots are used to doing things the way we do things without support. And, our call outs are more like manufacturer training call outs. We don't use airline SOPs because everybody that we employ, they come from different airlines. They're speaking English, but they're speaking a different language in the cockpit. So if we're able to immediately just grab pilots that have all been trained to the same standard, we have instant standardization throughout the operation, which is safety, which answers questions, which allows them to go out there and troubleshoot and problem solve in their own language, using their own SOPs, their own checklists. There's no questions. There's not two pilots speaking different languages in the cockpit. So
everybody wins. It's not exactly normal Tuesday for them,
yeah,
but at least it's like normal-ish.
It's normal-ish. And I know Spirit pilots. Bob knows Spirit pilots. One of my closest friends from the earliest days of my flying, my CFI, has been at Spirit for 14 years.
Wow.
In the training department. So that's the other thing. Not everybody's cut out for this. And even if they are, not everybody's just the right personality fit. The last thing we wanted to do is, I don't feel comfortable with this. And I don't understand how you can do this. And we needed to have people that we could rely on that would trust us as much as we trusted them. And so the key was, rather than just soliciting the public at large, was to lean into the pilots that we knew on property that understand the mission and that have an idea in their head of who they would call on if they were us. And so we immediately started a group chat on WhatsApp called Spirit Pilots. And we put like our core 5 or 6 Spirit pilots that we knew into that group chat. And we gave them admin privileges and they started adding other names. And I think it took about 2 hours and we went from 5 to 40 pilots in the channel. And there were Spirit pilots that were stranded in Nashville and Newark they just delivered passengers. They just flown a revenue trip and they're like, yeah, this is crazy. I'm in Newark. Send me wherever you want. I'm packed for the next 2 days. Just let me know what you need.
Sure, I'll take it. I got nowhere else to be right now.
Yeah, I had one guy that only had shorts and uniforms. He goes, "Is it okay if I fly in shorts?" I'm like, "Of course, man.
Send them to Arizona. It's hot there."
That's where they're going. You're going to Arizona. So getting the pilots back to your original question, getting the pilots organized and committed to different tail numbers was priority one. A domestic flight, especially without an SFP, is like the easiest possible thing that we do from an operational standpoint. And that doesn't take into consideration gaining access. We could talk about the real headache. I mean, headache is.
I mean,
is an
that's where
understatement.
I'm going next. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll go there when you're ready. But the logistics surrounding the repo and the nature of it, that was the biggest issue. But let me also say, we were counting on being able to fly these aircraft on the Spirit AOC. And within the first 12 hours, that plan dissolved and we had to pivot. So the plan was we had crews. This was a miracle, to be honest with you. Trigger was pulled at 6 p.m. on Friday. By 9 a.m., I had 20 pilots in 6 cities spread out, ready to move airplanes at 9 a.m. on a Saturday.
Wow.
Okay. So I'm bragging about that, and less of it has to do with me. And a lot of it has to do with these pilots just being just solid people that had a get it done kind of attitude. But it was a mirror. I had never seen anything so just quickly compiled and organized. So, then there was the travel. We got people, we didn't even have hotels. Like these pilots were like, okay, I'm in Orlando. Where do you want me? It's like 8 a.m. They've been up all night. We're like, hang on a second. We'll get back to you on that. And then we started dividing the WhatsApp into different trip channels with the crews, with our dispatch team, and so on and so forth. But when the clock struck 10 and the first airplane was pushed out of a hangar in Houston, we were getting ready to get the first airplane moved. And at that point in time, Bob and I were both like, I can't believe it. We're going to get all 10 of these airplanes moved by Sunday. All of a sudden, a wrench hit the gears, everything seized. And apparently one of the Spirit 119 management pilots started calling the other pilots that were in this list saying, you guys are illegal to fly this. You can't fly this. This is an illegal operation. Like they had no understanding of what we were doing. And then within an hour, I'm at a graduation and Bob is in conference calls with the FAA, the Spirit 119 team, the lessor. At this point, we only have one lessor we're working for, 10 airplanes. Their legal team, which is all in Ireland. It was like a conference call with like 25 faces on it, all on mute with like a few people talking. Nobody understood what we were trying to do. And at the end of the conversation, very long story short, the FAA said, look, I mean, you make a compelling case. I don't see how this isn't legal. But again, Spirit's the one that has the maintenance program. It's going to be their call whether you can do this or not. And they decided not. And why wouldn't they? I mean, I was annoyed at the time, but why would they say, okay, we'll help you? Why would they? So we had to pivot and we had to switch to a model where we had to get a DAR, a designated airworthiness rep, on site to each of these cities to start signing SFPs, inspecting the records, inspecting the aircraft physically, and issuing an SFP so that we can move the airplane completely without any involvement from Spirit. At that point, Spirit was disconnected.
Wow. So you went from, okay, we've got an easy path. Yep. This makes sense. Logistically speaking, this is the best way things could go, to needing to have someone from the FAA on site to sign. Now, here's an odd question. Is it an actual physical piece of paper, or is this just all electronic these days?
It's electronic that results in a physical piece of paper where the original has to be hand signed in ink and on board the aircraft. So it has to happen. Well, there's also a physical inspection required. So the DAR, and these aren't FAA employees, these are designees. So they're, they have their own businesses. Most of them come from an engineering background. None of them are particularly young. Like, these are very experienced professionals that this is all they do. And there may be 100 or so DARs in the US, but of that 100, about 93 of them deal with biz jets and light aircraft. So very few, they can all have a 103 designation and be licensed to deal with heavy aircraft, but very few understand the nuts and bolts of it, because it's the ones that are regionally in Florida and in Arizona and in Southern California that deal with all these airplanes coming in and out of storage. And they're the ones that have a high level understanding of how to review the records and the important things and do an on-site physical inspection in 6 hours versus in 72 hours. So if we were to just randomly pull DARs that are based in, Sioux City or, Syracuse or whatever, I mean, I'm just randomly picking out cities here. There are DARs that live in places like that, but it's a huge learning curve. And they're not going to, they're representing the FAA. Everything's on the line with that signature. So they're going to be a lot more thorough. They're going to have to consult with their direct reports at the FAA to make sure everything's right before they issue signatures. So that shrunk the pool to like 4 or 5 people that could do this in the speed that we need to do this. And the first call, and we have very good relationships with these DARs because they're like colleagues. I mean, I see these guys every week, and I have for 20 years. Like, we know each other.
Because this is normally how you do things.
This is how we do things. This is how ferry flights happen, is because when an airplane is not on an AOC, and, minus all the LATAM and Avianca, and, when we move things for airlines, they're on AOC. But that's like a very, very minority of the trips that we do. The vast majority are owned by the leasing company, and they need some sort of a special airworthiness certificate in order to move. So DARs are a normal ingredient in the recipe.
So you find these people, bring them to these aircraft, you get the sign off. Then how do you get access to these aircraft? Because if Spirit's not helping you, I assume that airports are kind of looking at you the way a dog looks at its owner after they've faked throwing the ball.
And it's definitely not like that old TV show where you're just like scoping out the planes through the fence and then hopping over when the security guard's not looking, right?
Getting chased by dogs,
like
all that stuff. No, that's not how it works. Like, the battles for repossession take place in courtrooms. There are people that are way smarter than Bob and I, and that, these are lawyers that are versed in Cape Town Treaty, or and all the laws of repossession and leasing, and most of them are in Ireland. So that battle gets fought without any visibility from us. Like, we're just like a CC on the email that gets copied on the documents at the end. The logistics of gaining access was entirely on us, and it wasn't something that we could plan for, because not only is it unknown, it's unknown with every airport in the system. So there's not like a standard way to do this. Every single airport was a learning curve that began as soon as we had boots on the ground and people on the telephone. And the first step is figuring out who to even call first. The first few guys that we sent out, we armed with the lease termination orders and letters of authorization, powers of attorney from the leasing company, signed by the leasing company legal team. And they just basically said, I need to talk to an airport manager. And eventually they get put in touch with the airport manager, who looks at them cross-eyed and looks at their jeans and their baseball cap and their Spirit ID and like a stack of hastily printed legal documents from Irish companies. And then they say, in almost every case, they say, let me get back to you.
Yeah.
So every single airport, we had airplanes at the initial 10 were at Orlando, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Charlotte, Columbus, and Houston, 6 airports. And we were trying to tackle them all very quickly. And what I noticed right off the bat was the smaller airports were far easier to deal with. So like Columbus, Ohio, like we had resolution within the first half an hour, because it's like a very small list of people that can make decisions at a place like that. We're in Lauderdale, you have Broward County and the airport authority and the sheriff's department and the terminal employee, the SIDA badging office. And there's so many different people in the mix that it takes time for the message to kind of filter through the system and reach the right ears. And then they have to make calls, and then the legal teams have to get together and all that stuff. So gaining access was tough. And then even after we've convinced the people that we were legitimate and we were there to do our jobs, the next challenge was, where are the airplanes physically parked at each airport?
And how do you get to them?
And how do you get to them? Because airports are very complex. There's not like just a perimeter fence and the authority to be within it. There are different parts of airports. Some have military ramps. They all have a SIDA, which is the secure area where passengers come in and out, where you have to have like a background check and fingerprints to have a badge access to, and a reason. And outside of that, there's like metal detectors and all the other things that you go through as a passenger. Whenever you board an airplane, you're in the SIDA as a passenger, but you're in like the passenger designated areas of the SIDA. You can't just go onto the ramp. In fact, airline pilots, let's say a Spirit pilot's based in Chicago, if they're in Miami or Lauderdale, They don't have access to anything beyond the direct vicinity of their aircraft on the SIDA. Like they're not allowed to like walk to any other part of the airport when they're not in the terminal. So the same goes for the handling companies and the fueling companies on site. The city of Philadelphia has 6 handling companies and 4 fuelers, and they all are able to fuel or handle aircraft at different locations on the field, but not all locations on the field. So we may have a handler that has an A320 tow bar, but they can't access the cargo ramp. And we may have a fueler that we have a contract with, but they can't access the terminal area hydrants. So those are just a few examples, but like multiply that by 100 and those are all the helmet fires that we were dealing with in the first 48 hours, trying to figure out how to get people on the airplanes and the support services to the airplanes. And that's even before we've seen a single airplane.
Steve, how much less hair do you have now?
I just looked at the podcast. I edited our podcast and I noticed there was a lot of gray hairs on my black shirt. So they're falling out rapidly.
Oh, no.
Man, the logistics of all of this between the tiny airports and the big airports, can't help but notice there are still 4 Spirit aircraft at Newark. So maybe those just live there now. We can push them across the turnpike into like Newark Bay.
It's going to turn, those 4 are going to turn into the evergreen 747 that was at JFK for
that
decades.
Eventually left. But the way you're talking with the complexity, I can't imagine those are going anywhere anytime soon. But like this is just crazy.
Yeah. And think about it this way, right? So here's the case study that everyone's afraid of: Kingfisher. So So when Kingfisher,
I did not have Kingfisher on my bingo card.
No. Next, we're going to talk about Eric Air. I think is involved in that nonsense too. That's a deep cut, Steve.
It's a deep cut, but it's so relevant because, for people that don't know, Kingfisher was a discount carrier in India. It was owned by a rich guy that owned a beer company, right? Kingfisher, I think, was a beer. I don't know the whole background. But anyway, they went bankrupt. They shut down very quickly. And the Indian courts are among the most difficult on the planet to deal with as far as recovering assets, through the courts. Everything moves at a snail's pace. And when Kingfisher went bankrupt, the airplanes were spread throughout India, and all these lawsuits took, at the end of the day, 2 or 3 years to be settled. And the vast majority of the fleet, dozens, if not 100 airplanes, many of which were brand new, rotted away to the point where they had to be parted out on site. Like they couldn't even be ferried. There was corrosion, engine cores were seized. There were people living in airplanes. I mean, it was a disaster. So I would have to assume that somewhere close to $1 billion or more of assets were destroyed because the logistics simply didn't exist to get those airplanes to a safe location to be put into storage. That's why everybody's always in a rush to move as fast as possible, because the longer it takes, the longer it's going to take. And the longer it's going to take, the longer the aircraft is going to remain unpreserved.
Well, at least you don't have to go all that far to get some of these aircraft out and back. It's not like you're flying Qatar to the other end of the world to pick up these aircraft. So that's at least a small bonus for you, right?
It is. I mean, the fact that it was a U.S. domestic operation definitely lent to our ability to execute the way we did. Said and done, I think I can't pick an exact number because we had some things change. I think at one time we had 26 airplanes on the docket, but some of the airplanes ended up getting moved by the Spirit 119 team, but we still had crews on site. And so, and travel and logistics. So we still have invoices for every single one of them. But I don't know, we flew either 24, 23, 24. I don't know how many we actually flew, but it isn't over. Like I fully anticipate additional calls coming in, over the next couple of weeks before all the airplanes have officially moved.
Well, look, we love the business for you. We love that you have been busy. I hope to never see you be doing this again in the US. Not with any of our airlines, because no one wants to see this happen. But if anyone's doing it, we're glad to talk to you about it and get some insight into a part of this industry, which very few see. Well, I guess you've popped up in my feed on Blue Sky from that Wall Street Journal article like 7 times in the last day. So more people are seeing this than usual. But let's not do this again anytime soon, okay?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's some things that the industry has going for it right now. Obviously, fuel prices not being one of them. But there was a very short supply of A320 and A321 CO and NEO aircraft that are good flyers out there. And so a lot of these airplanes and engines, especially engines, are already, I mean, I know for a fact of a bunch, let's say no less than 12 aircraft that are already destined to new operators in the next few months that are already on our schedule to start moving them. So that's a really good thing. There is some good to be honed from this. And we're ready. We're hoping that this is kind of the accelerant that we needed. We were expecting 2027 and late 2026 to be busy because the lease extensions that were signed after the GTF issues last year, they all, they were all mostly 1 and 2 year lease extensions. So we're anticipating things being busy anyway, but I think this is going to be a catalyst to increase that. And by the way, before we go, I also want to say I am putting out like a cockpit casual / hybrid podcast. It's going to be cool. I'm actually almost done. Like, this has been another miracle. It's not going to, don't expect the same production value as cockpit casual to a T, but it's darn close. And I hope to have this out by Friday because my wife and I are going on vacation on Saturday.
That's quick.
Perfect.
So
it's just going to be, put it in the show notes.
Is it just going to be footage from your iPhone of you going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, for like 2 hours? Because I'd still watch that.
There's a little bit of that. No, so I got to fly one of the planes. So I flew the Philly to Marana aircraft. So I brought my full setup of cameras, but I did forget to bring camera mounts. So it was interesting. Like, I was in such a hurry to get out the door, but I brought all the cameras. I filmed on the ground in Philly. I filmed in the air. I filmed on the ground in Marana. And then I also had Bob receiving all the aircraft with a camera. Pat flew a couple of aircraft he was filming. And I also dropped off both crews that took the 2 airplanes out of Atlantic City for another one of our clients. And I interviewed some Spirit pilots. I even interviewed the #1 flight attendant who was hired back when they had Convair's. I did not know Spirit ever had Convair's.
I did not.
Yeah. She was hired by Spirit by Ned in 1990. They were a charter carrier with Convair's, which then went to DC-9s, to MD-80s, to Airbuses. And she's been there throughout the whole, I was in high school. I was in junior high when she got hired. And so she had some great stories. And so and it was very emotional. There's like this whole human side to this thing. And Bob and I, obviously we had a very technical job to do, but we got to know a lot of these pilots and their families even. And just over the last week, it really hit us that there's so many stories and what these guys are going through so much right now. And I wanted to get a little bit of that in there too. So I got good stuff. Let's see if my editing skills are enough to do it justice. I have my doubts, but I think it'll be good. And I think it's worth tuning into.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much, Steve. As soon as that's up, we'll put a link in the show notes here so folks can listen to our conversation and then head over and get that angle on everything that you've been doing. So before we go, Steve, tell us a little bit about the new podcast that you and Bob are doing and then where folks can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So we started Cockpit Casual, the podcast, and the background is that I don't publish enough cockpit casuals to really get the traction that I need to. So I wanted like shorter content. I wanted more uploads. And Bob and I always have so much to say. And of course, everybody loves Captain Bob. So we decided we were going to do a podcast. We're 12 episodes in. We started it like 2 months ago. And I thought it might be a disaster, but it's not. I still think every time I record one, it's a disaster, but people listen. So we're getting like 20, 30,000 downloads between all the platforms each week, which is pretty good. And man, we talk about all kinds of stuff. We've had a couple guests. We've had an aviation therapist. We've had airplane facts with Max. We've had my father talking about the music in Cockpit Casual. We've had the Nomadic Ops team on one episode. And then there's some episodes where we just rant and rave for an hour and a half. So find them on Apple and Spotify and all the others. It's called Cockpit Casual, the podcast. And then there's a YouTube companion that most episodes have as well. And it's basically the podcast with some bonus footage, but mostly just a couple of talking heads. And that gets uploaded to our regular Cockpit Casual YouTube channel, categorized in the podcast bin. But it's out there, and we'd love it if some of your audience crosses over and meets us over there as well. And
I would guess that there's a strong crossover audience here. I don't think we need to worry about that one.
Well, you guys pretty much gave us our start on the, media side of things. So and another reason why I always answer the phone for you guys.
Well, we appreciate that. And we'll have to have you back on sometime soon. Hopefully, I mean, not that there isn't some good here. Like Jason said, we're glad that you are doing this, but let's talk about more exciting stuff the next time we have you on. I want to thank Steve Giordano, who's the co-founder of Nomadic Aviation Group and an all-around great guy, for coming back on the show this week to tell us about all the work that he's been doing to get the Spirit fleet into the desert. Steve, thank you so much.
Get back out there, Steve.
I got invoices to write. I got money to collect.
There you go. Ian. Good luck.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ian. It's been awesome as always, and always looking forward to coming back on whenever you'll have me.
Thanks, Steve. Welcome back, Jason. Steve's always fantastic to talk to. Not the least of which he's extremely engaging and probably knows more about the aviation industry than you and I could ever hope
to.
He's probably forgotten. What I was trying to say, he's probably forgotten more about the aviation industry than you or I could ever hope to know. But on the one hand, when an airline goes out of business, it's always extremely tough because it was very clear that Spirit was going to go out of business. Whether that happened this month, next month, the writing was on the wall. Unless they had found a merger partner. But on the other hand, you feel for the people who make up the airline. And I'm really happy to see that, Steve's been able to find some of those pilots at least a little bit of work.
Yeah, or at least enough work to, get home or get out of wherever they were.
Right, yeah.
So there is that as well. The story about the one pilot only having shorts and his uniform being like, hey, can you send me somewhere warm? Like, great, how about the boneyard? yeah, that'll do.
Yes, you can fly for Nomadic in shorts. Let's turn our attention to something much more stuffy and stodgy. Of course, the Lufthansa Group.
Hi.
Lufthansa Group has announced, as of this week, because it had its annual shareholder meeting, so there's a bunch of announcements, the largest of which is that they are taking their 41% stake in ITA Airways up to 90, spending an additional 325 million euros.
Which was always kind of the plan, right?
This is the plan.
They're doing the thing it said it would do.
Yes. Italy will hold on to, or the Ministry of Transport for Italy will hold on to the remaining 10% for the moment, but Lufthansa Group can purchase those shares beginning in 2028. And I would be shocked if they did not wish to do so at that point.
Yeah, really feels like we're never going to get that Alitalia brand back. Remember that little bit of time where it was ITA powered by Alitalia and we were certain that it was just going to flip the other way around. It was just going to become Alitalia again one day, but seems like that's not what's going to happen.
Yeah,
Too bad.
There's still hope somewhere.
Okay.
Somewhere. I'm not sure where.
Fingers crossed.
Somewhere. There you go.
I mean, Lufthansa likes its sub-brands, so maybe there can be an ITA, part of the Lufthansa group, and a subgroup of ITA, and it could be a little Alitalia offshoot. Yeah, why not?
Sure. I wouldn't put anything. And all of those flights would be operated by Air Baltic.
Oh, of course. I mean, there's no other way. No, we can't even do city airlines anymore because Lufthansa, never going to get boring.
Never. Not boring here. The group has ordered 10 A350s and 10 787s in addition to all of the other wide-body aircraft that Lufthansa Group already has on order. So that takes them up to 107 total wide-body orders. And we don't know where these aircraft are going to go yet.
Yes, meaning Lufthansa Group loves to order airplanes and then figure out where those airplanes are going to go amongst its many subgroup carriers. Eventually, one day, maybe Discover Airlines, maybe Eurowings, maybe Lufthansa, maybe Austrian, maybe Brussels, maybe ITA. Who knows? Could go to any of them. But very little fanfare. Just kind of just happened, which is fine. I think it's funny that it happened to be the week after its first actual production 777X finally flew from Boeing. So that's I don't think we talked about that last week.
No, we should.
But I don't think we did. This was the first actual production ready 777X had its first flight last week, a Lufthansa 777X with its full interior, which is, I'm sure, going to be a whole story in and of itself because that interior was designed probably about a decade ago. So we're going to get into that realm back the same kind of story with the A380 and the 787, that by the time those aircraft finally entered service, it was like a decade old, out of date product. So it really seems like that's what's going to happen here with the 777X, but finally some progress. Finally some progress.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how out of date that interior is when they finally introduce it into service, and then how soon they need to take it out of service to retrofit it.
No, let's not talk about that yet.
We'll get there eventually. Let's talk about another announcement that Lufthansa Group made this week. Their airlines will begin restarting Tel Aviv flights as early as June. So Austrian Airlines will begin in June with flights back to Tel Aviv. Then Lufthansa and Swiss will begin in July. And then Eurowings will follow on mid-July.
Sure. Check back in June, July, and mid-July to see if any of that actually happens.
That's a fair point, Jason.
Yeah.
The EU has also agreed to suspend slot use it or lose it rules and fuel tankering rules, which is what Lufthansa was arguing for. But there's a big if shortages appear.
Yeah, that just seems like common sense. If shortages appear and you can't operate the flight, slot rules shouldn't apply. It seems like common sense out of the EU to me.
Maybe that's why I'm a little surprised.
Because they're announcing it ahead of time and there's a plan and it makes sense. Yeah. That's rare these days. Hopefully it doesn't happen and we don't need any of that. But yeah, not much progress going on in opening up any shipment of jet fuel to Europe from the Middle East. So if shortages appear, really seems likely to transition to when shortages appear at some point. It doesn't seem like it's happening imminently this summer, or at least the earlier parts of the summer, but haven't seen much progress in this space yet. So I don't know.
We await news.
We await news. Great way to put it.
Because of the availability of jet fuel, the high cost of jet fuel, and everything else, I'm waving my hands wildly, Air India has formalized a summer schedule reduction. The airline is cutting 121 weekly flights through August. So not every week, not all routes, but a total of 121 weekly flights, a mix of complete route eliminations as well as step downs in service. So Chicago, Newark from Delhi, JFK from Mumbai. So basically, New York keeps service from Delhi and from Mumbai, just not both services to both airports.
Oh, rude.
Sorry. Shanghai, Singapore from Chennai, but Singapore keeps Mumbai and Delhi service. Dhaka from Mumbai, but they keep Delhi service. And then Malé in the Maldives is completely losing service. Others are being reduced, some just by 1 or 2 per week, some by many more, depending on what the initial level of service was. So certain city pairs are much more well-served than others and will be much less well-served. Looking at Delhi, Singapore, which is decreasing quite handily, or Delhi, Bangkok, which is going down, not by as much. I did not realize how many weekly flights there were between Delhi and Kathmandu. That one surprised me. That city pair is going from 42 weekly flights down to 28.
Wow, that's a big cut.
Yeah. So keeping an eye on that to see if there are any further cuts. But at the moment, it looks like Air India has solidified its summer schedule. There has been a lot of speculation about Air India because of a social media post that made absolutely no sense, not the least of which it was easily falsifiable by just looking at Flight Radar 24. And pulling up the map and filtering Air India flights.
Tell me more.
There was a post that got picked up by way too many media outlets for my continued belief in humanity that Air India was canceling all of its international flights.
Who would believe that? Come on.
Enough people that I got a whole bunch of emails.
Oh, come on. You at least have to give like a week's notice before you cancel everything like that. But no. That's just, come on. People believe that? No.
They believed it enough to ask about it.
Okay. Well, you know what? At least they're asking about it. That's important to not just see something that you think is probably fake and go, oh, yeah, okay, whatever, moving on. People questioned it. And that's the least we can ask for.
I appreciate that you're looking on the bright side of things here, Jason.
You know what? I'm having a bright day. Let's go with that.
All right. We'll go with it. Tell me more about what's going on in New Zealand. This is a story that you have flagged, good sir.
Yes. And I didn't want to forget about it and put it next week because we'd probably forget about it permanently. But apparently at some point I signed up for the Transportation Accident Investigation Commissions in New Zealand to get final reports emailed to me. So that's cool. So I did not know that in, what was this, in 2020, February 7th, 2024, a Air New Zealand Dash 8 or Q300 overran the runway at, where was this? Sorry, I'm catching up real quick, in Timaru Aerodrome, wherever that might be in New Zealand. But final report was issued, and I just wanted to call it out because I kind of like the format of the final report. It says what happened, why it happened, what we can learn, and who may benefit, and comes up with some nice photos as well. But they had a runway overrun by just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. Like they didn't even leave the pavement and didn't enter the grass, just left basically the end of the actual runway before they hit some other pavement. But it was just really interesting that the report says the aircraft reached speed of 97 knots. The captain called V1 rotate. And for those who know and those who don't, V1 is the speed at which you commit to takeoff. You do not abort your takeoff at that point. You are committed to going into the air. But at this point, the first officer observed a flock of birds flying to the right of the aircraft towards their takeoff path and said, oh no, apparently. And at that point took the initiative to lessen the angle of their takeoff, basically, to a lower pitch, brought the nose down a little bit, which the captain, unfortunately, interpreted as, oh, we're rejecting takeoff, and kind of took control and actually initiated an aborted takeoff at that point beyond the V1 speed, which is kind of a no-no. And at that point, because of that miscommunication, because apparently the issue was here, the CRM, the crew resource management, they were not communicating. The first officer didn't communicate that he was lowering the nose, lowering the pitch of the aircraft to go under the birds rather than initiating an aborted takeoff. And it was just really interesting to see the analysis of what is really not that big a deal in the end of the day, because the aircraft never even left the pavement. But for the first officer to not abort the takeoff, but to want to fly under the birds, I thought was quite an interesting take, which I don't think is something I've seen before.
Yeah, I still have a few questions about the pitch of the aircraft and how far off the ground or not off the ground they were.
Much, right?
No. I mean, it seems like it all happened. I mean, we're talking about
quickly.
4 seconds. We're talking about 4 seconds here. 064920 to 064924. So, I mean, not a ton of time, but super interesting to see how the interplay between the pilots resulted in this. And what's even more interesting to me is that you have this aircraft, it's a runway overrun, but they left the usable area of the runway by whatever the distance between the nose of the Q300 and the back of the door is.
I don't think there was actually any seated passengers on that aircraft who had physically left the threshold of that runway.
Correct. All of the seated passengers were still on the runway.
The crew departed the runway. The passengers did not. But also just looking at the cockpit voice recorder was interesting too. Of course, we don't hear it. We can read it. But just the back and forth of saying the captain retarded the power, started braking. At the same time, the first officer was recorded saying, oh, no. But at that point, it's too late. But yeah, things happen so quickly. It's just a really good breakdown of what happens when things happen really, really quickly. And in this case, thankfully, 1/3 of an airplane left the usable part of the runway, and all's well that ends well. But yeah, just wanted to toss that one in because I found it interesting.
Excellent. Back over here in the US, the Federal Aviation Administration is reminding airports that the FAA has millions of dollars available to install transponders on airport ground vehicles. This follows, of course, the crash between a Jazz Aviation CRJ and a Port Authority of New York and New Jersey ARF truck at LaGuardia. According to FAA Administrator Brian Bedford, vehicle movement area transmitters, or VMATs, help prevent dangerous runway incidents, and by accelerating the deployment of this technology, we're closing critical visibility gaps on our nation's runways and taxiways. So this money is part of the One Big Beautiful Bill money that allows the FAA to immediately begin equipping 1,900 vehicles at 44 airports that have ASDE-X and other airport surface surveillance capability, ASSC, which is in addition to the Surface Awareness Initiative, SAI, surveillance systems. That was a lot of acronyms. But here's where it gets interesting. There has already been plenty of money available to equip airport vehicles with transmitters going back to 2023. When the FAA took a look at this and said, hey, maybe it would be a good idea to prevent close calls. And then in 2024, when they issued a reminder that says there's plenty of funding for these things, you can get up to 200 airport transmitters. All the money's included. We will pay for all of this stuff, getting everything set up for these vehicle transmitters. And then in 2025, they reminded folks, there's still money. Here's how to get said money. And now here we are in 2026.
Yeah, and the release from the FAA makes it seem like this is some sort of magic money unlocked today that will immediately allow the equipage of 1,900 vehicles at the 44 airports that have ADS-X and ASCC and another 220 airports that have Surface Awareness Initiative surveillance systems. I mean, they could have done that before and they didn't. And like I said in previous episodes, especially at the accident airport LaGuardia, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has infinite money to do whatever the hell it wants, whenever it wants. And there is no roadblock for it to have done this at any point in the past. And it simply did not do that. So this isn't some sort of magic money that's going to allow the Port Authority to do something they couldn't do before. The Port Authority just chose not to do it.
This is specifically, so the announcement today, and the reason I went kind of down a rabbit hole on all of this, is that the FAA itself is finally equipping its vehicles at airports around the country.
With this technology. Remind me, was its own aircraft involved in this crash? No, it wasn't.
No, but I am shocked. No, I'm not shocked. Having been around for more than a minute and a half, I'm actually not shocked. But I'm saddened that the FAA didn't take the lead on this when the technology became available.
Well, I mean, this almost reminds me of back in the day when ADS-B out was first required and you had N1. Literally, the FAA's aircraft with the registration N1 did not have ADS-B out for quite a while, up until I think it was basically required. So not exactly shocking that the FAA wouldn't have done it. Yeah, I don't know. It just makes me sad and angry still, even if I'm missing the point entirely, because this is about the FAA's own aircraft.
Well, I don't think you're missing the point entirely. I think it's still important to call out the fact that this could have been done sooner.
Yes. Then again, I don't really know what FAA ground vehicles are kind of tooling around airports like LaGuardia anyway. There must be some. I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
I mean, from my own working knowledge of Chicago, there are at least a few vehicles that do operate on the airport movement area, but I don't know how regularly they do.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting question. There's 1,900 of them. So obviously they're out there doing something.
I guess they're out there, engineers, mechanics fixing light. No, the lights belong to the airport. Landing systems, I guess, belong to the FAA, like the ILS arrays and stuff like that. Because I'm pretty sure lighting systems and all that belong to the airport. So
this rabbit hole just got deeper.
Yeah. If you know what the hell FAA is driving around out there with its 1,900 vehicles, please let us know, because we certainly appear not to know.
All right. Let's move on to a big month for Boeing, where undisclosed airlines placed a few orders.
Our favorite airline, really. It was really a big month for Boeing. It's 135 net orders versus just the 7 net orders for Airbus. but we don't know where they're going. This is a pretty big thing for there to be a large cache of not just orders. These aren't just like little orders for the 737. This is 52 737 MAXs, 29 787s, and 28 777Xs. So somebody or somebodies went on a shopping spree, and we're not allowed to know who yet. There's some back and forth out there. Maybe it was BA out there trying to top up its 777 order book. We don't know, though. It's who do you think? Who do you want it to be? And don't say Petchmoer.
No, far too new. We don't deal in aircraft that new. Absolutely not. I don't know. I've been thinking about it because the BA thing, yes, makes sense, but also I'm not sure. And the combo, I mean, if we're assuming that it's multiple airlines, then I mean it could be, you know, any number of top ups and regional orders and things like that. So I just don't know, Jason.
I don't know. I mean, I only say BA because our resident numbers guy, Gavin Werbeloff, said probably maybe BA. So, you know, he knows his numbers and he knows BA better than anyone. So I'm going with that.
All right. Well, we'll eventually find out.
One day.
Maybe. One day. Shareholders at Sun Country have approved the merger with Allegiant. And of course, just in time, Sun Country has unveiled a retro livery.
Sure, why not?
Okay.
If you're going down, you may as well go down swinging because, you know, paint's expensive. And Allegiant's probably not going to get around to painting this one for a long time because it looks pretty damn good.
It does. It does.
I mean, surprisingly, you may not know it, but Sun Country is actually, they've been around a while and they've got some history to the brand. It's not just this little 737 operator that flies around out of MSP. I believe they even flew DC-10s way back in the day with this livery.
It was, you know, exactly. It was quite the operation. November 826 Sierra Yankee is the registration, so go check that out. Coming to a secondary Sun Country airport near you. There was a missile test out of India last week. Giant NOTAMs. Hey, we're going to be launching a missile. Don't fly here.
Oh, that's straightforward.
Very straightforward. Happens all the time. Apparently one Garuda flight didn't quite get the memo.
Ooh, yeah. Well, that NOTAM may have been on page 62 of 78. And
had to make it through all the birds and cranes first.
Maybe they just missed it. But this resulted in apparently a 4.5 hour hold on a flight between, where was this going? From Saudi Arabia back to Indonesia. I think it was a Hajj flight. So this flight may have even been configured in a quite uncomfortable configuration, as airlines have a tendency to do, to get as many passengers on board for the Hajj as possible. But apparently somebody missed the memo and they had a 4.5 hour hold, resulting in, how long was this flight?
This flight ended up being almost 13 hours.
That is crazy. And how long should it ordinarily have taken? Something like 8? Less? Something along those lines?
Yeah.
That's crazy. But the point to me that's crazy is it's not just the fact that they did it, it's the fact that they could do it, that they had enough fuel, with fuel being as expensive as it is right now, to take a 4.5+ hour holding pattern, which is just crazy. It's not like they weren't anywhere where they couldn't land and take on more fuel, like they were over India. They could have, but apparently either they planned ahead and they were okay with this, or they didn't plan ahead and were somehow okay with this. It just, either way, it doesn't make any damn sense.
I don't have an answer. But if you do, drop us a note at podcast@fr24.com and fill us in and let us know what was going on here, because there's a lot of unanswered questions. Unfortunately, Jason, we'll close the show with an answer to a question that no one asked.
Uh-oh.
Mitsubishi Heavy Industries regional jet says that the CRJ 200 could fly for another 2 decades.
You know that animated GIF, Michael Scott from The Office going, no, please, God,
yes.
no. That is the appropriate reaction to this. Nobody's asking for this. Nobody wants this unless it's the CRJ 450 then maybe people are
Maybe.
asking for this. Maybe. And your name is Scott Kirby, if you're asking that question.
This comes out of an interview that the president of MHIRJ did with Flight Global, where they were talking about the history and future of the CRJ. Obviously, they're not building any more of them. So they were talking about maintaining the existing ones. And the argument here is that, yes, they often bear the brunt of a slowdown. However, they often lead the vanguard of a recovery because these smaller jets are so much easier to fill that airlines like to keep them around. And because they like to keep them around, they have to maintain them. And so they're saying they have another 20 years worth of life cycle for most of the CRJ 200s.
Ooh.
And that's not what I wanted to hear.
Nobody wants to hear that, but you got to do what you got to do, I guess. And if another 20 years of the CRJ 200 is what we got to do, so be it. Doesn't mean we have to like it. Ugh.
And on that lovely note, let's call this episode 370, because that's exactly what it has been. Episode 370 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.